You won't believe what happened one quiet evening when everything was about to change. He was just my stepson, the kid I barely noticed most days. But that night was different. It's the kind of thing you don't expect, the kind of twist that shakes your very foundation. Have you ever had one of those moments when the lines between what you thought was right and what you feel suddenly blur? Where the choices you make seem impossible and the consequences of your actions might just haunt you forever. Trust me, this is not your average story. You've heard of betrayal in marriages, sure. But what I'm about to share is unlike anything you've read before. A story so shocking, so raw, that it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family, trust, and forbidden love. It's a real, untold confession of infidelity. And I can't wait to tell you exactly how my life was forever changed in one unforgettable night. Before we dive deeper, I want you to do something. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video. Trust me, you don't want to miss a single moment of what's coming. Leave a comment. Tell me what you would do if you were in my shoes. Stay tuned because this story is about to get real. I had just returned home from college, expecting the same old, familiar emptiness. The kind of silence that clung to the walls, like a forgotten memory. But as soon as I stepped inside, something felt different, warmer somehow. Ryan, my 19-year-old stepbrother, greeted me with a casual smile. The same Ryan who once seemed so distant and immature now stood before me, looking older, more mature than I had ever imagined. It struck me then, he wasn't the same kid who used to annoy me with his video games and constant noise. Something had shifted in him while I was away. The house felt unusually quiet without our parents around. It was just the two of us, left to reconnect in a way I hadn't anticipated. Ryan had been more than just a stepbrother to me. We shared a history, a bond that, at times, felt almost like a secret. But now, in this quiet house, everything was different. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us, and yet I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Maybe it was the absence of our parents, or maybe it was the way Ryan seemed so comfortable in his own skin now. We exchanged a few words, light and casual, but there was something underlying our conversation. There was a depth I hadn't noticed before. Ryan's presence, once something I took for granted, now felt more significant. I realized how much I had missed in the time I'd been away. What I had dismissed as mere moments of routine were in fact small pieces of his growth, pieces I had overlooked. He wasn't the boy I remembered. He had become someone else. Someone more interesting, someone more real. As I sat there, absorbed in my thoughts, I wondered about what had been happening in his life while I was off at college. We never really talked about his feelings or what he wanted for himself. There was always an unspoken distance between us, something I hadn't even noticed until now. And in that silence, something between us was beginning to change, even though neither of us had said a word about it yet. We decided to grab a pizza. It was the kind of simple meal that felt right, especially on a night like this. The warm, cheesy aroma filled a room as we sat down together, sharing slices and laughing at old jokes. It felt easy, comfortable, like we had slipped into a rhythm we hadn't realized we'd been missing. The banter between us flowed smoothly, but then, just like that, the tone shifted. We started talking about things that were deeper than we ever had before. It was as if, suddenly, we had permission to be more than just step-siblings. We could be real. It started with this silly memory about how we used to argue over the last slice of pizza. A moment that would have seemed trivial just a few weeks ago became a symbol of something else now, a shared history. But as we spoke, I realized there was more to our connection than just past fights and playful insults. Ryan began to talk about his dreams, his hopes for the future, his ambitions. And for the first time, I saw him not just as my stepbrother, but as someone who had his own life, his own path to follow. I had never really stopped to think about it before, but now I was listening. Ryan's words made me reflect on my own life. How much had I really been paying attention to what was going on around me? The truth was, I had been so wrapped up in my own world, my own college life, that I had forgotten to check in with him. The way he spoke about his future made me realize how little I knew about him anymore. But it wasn't too late. This moment right here felt like a second chance to reconnect. As the conversation turned to other memories, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. The kind of bond we were building wasn't just a product of time, but of genuine effort. And I began to wonder, could this simple meal, this unexpected moment of reconnection, be the start of something new? Or were we just two people sharing pizza, pretending that things were different when, in reality, nothing had really changed at all? Later, we found ourselves standing side by side at the kitchen sink, doing the dishes. It seemed like such a mundane task, but there was something about it that felt different. We weren't just washing plates. We were talking in a way that felt raw and real. Ryan started sharing his plans to become an engineer, something I hadn't known he'd been considering. He spoke about it with such passion, and for a moment, I was taken aback. How had I missed this side of him? The kid I once thought of as a goofball had grown into someone with real direction. The sound of running water and clinking dishes filled the silence between us, but there was an unspoken understanding growing in the space between. Ryan wasn't just my stepbrother anymore. He was a young man with dreams, with ambitions. As I listened to him, I realized how much I had underestimated him. How many times had I dismissed his potential, thinking he would always be the same kid I knew? But now, I could see him differently, more clearly. And that realization hit me like a ton of bricks. It was almost as if we were reconnecting in a way we hadn't done before, on a deeper level. Doing something as simple as chores together allowed us to peel back the layers, revealing who we really were beneath the surface. It wasn't about the task itself. It was about the time spent, the space we were giving each other to open up. In that moment, I felt closer to him than I ever had before. And it wasn't just because of what we talked about. It was the way we shared that space, that quiet connection that needed no explanation. I couldn't help but wonder, though, if these moments of vulnerability would continue. Would we keep talking, keep growing closer, or would we eventually fall back into the old patterns of distance and silence? There was something about this quiet time together that made me believe there was hope for something more between us. But what exactly that more looked like, I wasn't sure yet. It wasn't long before Ryan disappeared into the garage, his usual hangout spot. I followed him, curiosity piqued by the faint sound of tools and the unmistakable scent of motor oil. As I watched him work on his car, I couldn't help but admire his focus. There was a certain confidence in the way he handled the engine, a patience I hadn't known he possessed. His hands moved with the kind of precision that only comes from genuine interest and practice. I stood there, unsure of what to say, but feeling a strange sense of respect for the person he had become. It struck me then, Ryan wasn't just my goofy stepbrother anymore. He had found something that truly captivated him, something that gave him purpose. I had always known he liked cars, but seeing him in his element, immersed in the task at hand, was something entirely different. I had never taken the time to appreciate his interests like this before. It was humbling, honestly, to realize how much I had missed. And the more I watched, the more I understood that there was so much to him that I hadn't given credit for. Though I didn't know much about cars, I found myself fascinated by the way he talked about the mechanics, the way he could explain every part with such clarity. It was as though he had transformed into someone I didn't even recognize, a person with his own passions, his own expertise. And yet, in that moment, I felt a strong urge to connect with him, even if it was through something as simple as admiring his skill. Sometimes, admiration is the first step toward understanding someone on a deeper level. As he worked, we exchanged a few words, mostly about the car, but there was an underlying current of something else, something unspoken. I could see it in the way he glanced over at me, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond we were building. And I couldn't help but wonder, had this shared moment of admiration opened a door to something more? Something that had always been there, but had just been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling and rain pouring down in sheets. It was the kind of storm that made you feel safe indoors, curled up with a cup of tea or, in our case, huddled under blankets in the dim glow of candlelight. The power had gone out, leaving us with only the flickering flames for light. It could have been an unsettling night, but instead, it became something else entirely. The cozy atmosphere created by the storm outside was somehow comforting. And it was in this intimate setting that we found ourselves playing card games, laughing more freely than we had in ages. There was something about that storm that brought us closer. Maybe it was the shared experience of being stuck inside, cut off from the world. But as the wind howled outside, we found warmth in each other's company. The simple act of playing cards became a way to pass the time, but it also became a way to connect in ways that words alone couldn't express. Every laugh, every playful jab, felt like a step closer to something real, something tangible. The storm outside seemed to mirror the emotions stirring inside me, emotions I wasn't sure how to name. It was in the quiet moments between games that we started talking more openly, even if it was just a few words here and there. I could feel a shift in our dynamic, a sense of mutual appreciation that hadn't existed before. The walls we had both built over time seemed to crumble bit by bit. Ryan was no longer just my stepbrother, but someone I could talk to, someone I could confide in. And, for the first time, I wondered if this night of simple connection could change everything between us. As the storm continued to rage, I found myself lost in the comfort of our shared space. It was as though, for one night, the world outside didn't matter. All that mattered was the warmth between us, the laughter that filled the room, and the unspoken understanding that was slowly taking root. But with the storm still howling outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was on the horizon. Something that would change everything, for better or for worse. The night wore on, and with each passing hour, I felt something inside me shift. The conversation had deepened, and I realized that it was no longer just about the trivial things we usually spoke about. Ryan, in his quiet way, had started opening up about his own feelings, feelings I hadn't expected to hear. He admitted that he felt forgotten when I left for college. My heart sank as he spoke those words. I had never realized how my absence had affected him. To me, it had always seemed like he was fine, like he didn't need anyone. But now, hearing him speak, I understood how wrong I had been. It wasn't just his words that hit me, it was the raw emotion behind them. Ryan wasn't just telling me about his hurt. He was giving me a piece of himself I hadn't been ready to see. I could feel the weight of his words in my chest, a guilt that I hadn't expected. How could I have been so blind? In my mind, I was busy building my own life, consumed by the excitement of college and new experiences, but I had left behind someone who needed me more than I realized. As we sat there, the silence between us grew, thick with unspoken emotions. I found myself reflecting on my own mistakes, on how I had unintentionally neglected him. It wasn't that I didn't care, it was that I hadn't known how much he needed me. I could feel the guilt bubbling inside me, but it wasn't just guilt that lingered. There was something else, something more powerful, a desire to make things right, to show him, in any way I could, that I saw him now, that I understood him now, and I promised myself that I would do better. For the first time, I saw Ryan not as my stepbrother, but as someone with his own battles, his own heartache. He had suffered in silence, while I had been too caught up in my own world to notice. But in that quiet moment, as we shared our confessions, something began to heal. It wasn't just the words we spoke, but the act of listening, of acknowledging each other's pain. And I realized then that this moment, this raw exchange, was the beginning of something new between us. The next morning, Ryan seemed more distracted than usual. It wasn't like him to be so quiet, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. After a while, he finally admitted what was on his mind. He had missed a critical school deadline, one that could cost him his scholarship. The weight of his words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and I could see the panic creeping into his eyes. I knew how important this was to him, and I could feel his fear, a fear that wasn't just about the scholarship, but about disappointing himself and maybe even me. I didn't hesitate. Without thinking, I offered to help him. It wasn't about the task itself. It was about showing him that he wasn't alone. This wasn't just his crisis, it was ours. I could see the relief in his eyes, a flicker of hope where there had been only dread moments before. We got to work, and though it wasn't easy, I could see his confidence slowly returning. The more we worked together, the more I realized how much he had grown, how much I had underestimated him. This wasn't just about fixing a project, it was about reaffirming something much more important: our bond. The hours passed in a blur, but in that focused space, I could feel a shift happening between us. Ryan wasn't just my stepbrother anymore. He was someone who was capable of great things. I had always thought of him as the kid who needed help, but in reality, he was teaching me just as much as I was helping him. I could see his determination, his resilience, and I realized that he wasn't the same person I had left behind when I went to college. He was stronger, more capable than I had ever known. By the time we finished, Ryan looked at me with a quiet gratitude in his eyes. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about the trust we had built, the way we had supported each other when it mattered most. And as I left him that night, I couldn't help but feel that this experience, this collaboration, had forged something deeper between us. It wasn't just about getting the work done. It was about realizing that we were in this together. And somehow, that made all the difference. As we sat back after completing the project, there was a moment of quiet satisfaction in the air. Ryan's eyes shone with a newfound confidence, and for the first time, I truly saw him. This young man who had so much potential. He wasn't the boy who had to be constantly told what to do anymore. In that moment, he had taken ownership, not only of the project, but of his future. And I realized then that belief in both him and myself was the catalyst for this transformation. Ryan turned to me, a subtle smile playing on his lips. "I don't think I could have done it without you," he said, and for a moment, I saw a vulnerability in him I hadn't expected. But I also saw something else, pride. He had done it. We had done it. and I could feel the weight of that shared accomplishment hanging between us. It wasn't just about the project, it was about the belief we had in each other. For once, I saw him not as the kid who was always falling short, but as someone capable of achieving great things, someone who had the strength to overcome any obstacle. I reflected on how far we had come in such a short time. Just days before, I had been uncertain of our relationship, unsure of whether we could truly reconnect. But now I saw a different version of Ryan. A version that I was proud of, a version that was no longer confined by the expectations I had once placed on him. And I began to wonder if this moment of mutual growth, of recognizing each other's potential, was the key to something even more meaningful between us. Maybe this was just the beginning of a deeper connection, one that could stand the test of time. As I looked at Ryan, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. The person he had become was someone I admired, someone who had grown in ways I hadn't even realized. And as we shared that quiet moment of triumph, I understood that belief in each other, in our strength, in our potential, had changed everything. But, as with all things, I knew that the real test would come soon enough. There was still so much left unsaid between us. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, something unspoken but undeniable. Ryan had become more withdrawn, more distant, and I noticed it immediately. The easy camaraderie we had shared was now replaced with moments of silence, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. We still spent time together, still laughed, still shared stories, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Something lingered between us, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was just me feeling this way, or if he was struggling with the same unease. The unspoken words hung in the air like an unfinished sentence, each of us avoiding what we both knew was there. I kept trying to make sense of it, but it felt like every attempt to talk openly was met with an evasive response. Ryan was pulling away, and I couldn't figure out if it was because he felt overwhelmed by the recent closeness, or if there was something deeper I wasn't seeing. His vague answers only added to my frustration. Was he hiding something? Or was he simply unsure of how to navigate this newfound connection between us? I couldn't help but feel an emotional weight pressing on my chest. There had been such an undeniable closeness in the past few days, such a deep connection that it felt like we had crossed some invisible boundary. But now, it was as if we were both standing on opposite sides of an invisible wall, each hesitant to make the first move. I could feel the tension in every interaction. Small, fleeting moments that once felt lighthearted now seemed fraught with underlying meaning. And I couldn't figure out what was left unsaid. It was frustrating. And yet, as much as I wanted to confront it, I knew that sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that need the most time. So, we continued to dance around the tension, pretending it wasn't there. But in my heart, I knew it would eventually come to a head. And when it did, I hoped we would both be ready to face it. Whatever it was. The day had finally arrived. It was time for me to leave, to go back to the life I had built at college, leaving behind the warmth of this unexpected connection I had formed with Ryan. It felt strange, knowing that the bond we had developed over the past few days would be tested by distance. As I packed my things, I could sense the quiet sadness in the air, even though neither of us said it aloud. Ryan was quieter than usual, and every glance we exchanged seemed to carry more weight than it ever had before. As I loaded my suitcase into the car, Ryan came up to me, his usual easy smile absent. But his eyes, those eyes that had always been so full of mischief, now held something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. Without a word, he pulled me into a hug. It wasn't the kind of hug I expected, no teasing, no joking around. It was different, full of an unspoken understanding. For a moment, I could feel the depth of everything that had happened between us. The laughter, the late-night talks, the shared vulnerability. It all wrapped up into this one moment, this one embrace. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, pulling back. His words weren't just about the project we had worked on together. They were about everything that had changed between us. And in that moment, I realized just how much he had grown, and how much I had grown alongside him. We weren't the same people we had been when I first walked in the door, and that was something worth acknowledging. Even if we couldn't fully express it, we both knew that something had shifted. As I drove away, I couldn't help but smile through the bittersweet feeling in my chest. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it was stronger than I had ever imagined it could be. I knew that no matter where life took us, no matter the distance between us, the bond we had forged over these few days would last. It wasn't just a fleeting connection, it was something enduring, something that would carry us both forward. And I found comfort in that. Now that you've heard this part of the story, what are you thinking? How do you feel about the choices that were made and the consequences that followed? Sometimes, life doesn't offer clear answers. The decisions we make, especially when it comes to love and betrayal, can change everything in an instant. But the question remains, what will you do with the lessons you've learned from this? Will you let the knowledge shape you, or will you let it pass by? If this story hit close to home, if you felt the tension and the turmoil, then you're not alone. Many of us have faced situations that forced us to confront what we truly value. So ask yourself, how far would you go to protect your relationships? Are you willing to face the hard truths, even if they tear you apart? If you want to know what happens next, if you're ready to dive deeper into the complexities of love, betrayal, and the human heart, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications. Let's continue exploring these life-altering stories together. You won't want to miss what comes next.